All right, so Qwen 3.6 Plus just showed up and is genuinely making Claude Opus 5 sweat. I'm talking about a model that's roughly 15 times cheaper on input tokens, and these are two of the most capable AI models available right now. Both dropped in 2026, and the pricing gap is so wide it changes how you build. I'm comparing Qwen 3.6 Plus versus Claude Opus 5 across 4 real tests: coding accuracy, API pricing, context window, and latency, pulled from 16 verified sources, no vendor spin. The cheaper model might be totally fine for your pipeline, or it might blow up your production costs in a way you won't see coming until the bill arrives. I'm not going to tell you which one yet. So who actually needs to care about this? If you're running any kind of agentic pipeline, doing bulk document processing, or just paying API deals every month and wondering where the money goes, this comparison is for you. Picking the wrong model at volume means a workflow that bleeds cash instead of scaling affordably, and that's a real problem. Test 1, coding and reasoning accuracy. When a model fails this dimension, your agent writes code that looks right, passes a quick glance, and then breaks in production on edge cases. You spend hours debugging something the model confidently got wrong, and that's what actually costs you your time and your users' trust. What surprised me here is how lopsided some of these numbers are. Claude Opus 5 is sitting at 30.2% on Arc AGI 3, which is reportedly 3 times the next best model, and 64.7% on HLE with tools. Qwen 3.6 Plus doesn't have published figures of those benchmarks at all, so keep in mind these come from different test setups. It's not a clean head-to-head. Okay, so before I call this one, I want to be honest about something. Qwen 3.6 Plus does score 61.6% on Terminal Bench and 78.8% on Subway Bench, but those are against older Claude versions, not Opus 5. Nobody has run the same evil suite on both, so the gap might look bigger than it really is for your specific coding workflow. Honestly, I was expecting this to be closer. Claude Opus 5 takes coding and reasoning because it's the only model with frontier-level scores on Arc AGI 3, HLE, and agentic benchmarks, where Qwen simply has no published numbers to compete with, and that puts Claude Opus 5 up 1-0. On raw reasoning ceiling, it's not close. Test 2 API pricing. You spin up an agentic pipeline, test it, it works great, and then you scale it to a few thousand runs a day. Suddenly, you're looking at a monthly bill that's way larger than your whole infrastructure budget. And that's not hypothetical. That's what happens when you pick the wrong pricing tier at scale. I pulled the numbers from official pricing pages, and what I was looking at is pretty wild. Qwen 3.6 Plus is $0.325 per million input tokens. At Dash Scope, Claude Opus 5 is $5 per million, and on output, it's $1.95 versus $25. That's roughly 15 times cheaper on input and about 13 times cheaper on output. Even with Qwen's always-on chain of thought adding extra output tokens, it's still not close. Now, the gap is real, but a couple of things are worth knowing before you go all in on Qwen. Claude Opus 5 has batch pricing at $2.50 per million input tokens, which closes the gap a lot for repeated prompt workloads. And Qwen's always-on chain of thought means every single call generates a reasoning trace, which inflates your output token count whether you need it or not. Qwen 3.6 Plus takes pricing, and it's not even a debate. I was expecting Claude's batch tier to make this closer, but even at $2.50 per million tokens on batch, Qwen is still cheaper at standard rates, and that ties us up at 1 apiece. For anyone running high-volume pipelines, this pricing gap is the single biggest factor in the whole comparison. S3, context window, and output length. The failure mode here is pretty specific. You're generating a long analysis or a multi-file code output, and the model just cuts off mid-response because it hit its output limit. You have to chunk the task, stitch the pieces together, and hope nothing breaks at the seams, which adds up fast on complex jobs. Both models hit 1 million tokens on context window, so that part is a tie, but what I didn't expect is how big the output gap is. Claude Opus 5 supports 128,000 output tokens per response, while Qwen 3.6 Plus caps at 65,536. That's nearly double in a single call. Community reports also flagged that Qwen's recall starts to degrade near the top of its context range, though no equivalent data exists for Opus 5. Okay, so the 1 million token context window sounds like a tie, and on raw size it is, but the output length difference really only matters if you're doing bulk generation in one shot. For most retrieval or summarization tasks, 65,000 output is probably enough, and Qwen's context degradation at the upper range is community reported, so take it with a grain of salt. Claude Opus 5 takes this one, and the reason is pretty straightforward. 128,000 max output versus 65,000 is a real structural advantage for long-form generation tasks. I kind of figured they'd be closer since both hit 1 million on context, but the output ceiling difference is meaningful, and that moves the score to 2 for Claude Opus 5, 1 for Qwen 3.6 Plus. Test 4, response latency and throughput. The concrete pain here is you're iterating fast on a coding task, You send the prompt and you wait 11 seconds before the first token shows up. When you're literally hammering the model with rapid fire requests, that wait time stacks up and kills your flow completely. So I looked at what's actually published here, and honestly, it's a mess. Community blogs report Qwen 3.6 Plus at 158 tokens per second median throughput, but also an 11.5 second time to first token on the free tier, and there's no independent tokens per second figure for Opus 5 at all. Just a fast mode that's reportedly 2.5 times default speed. These are different testing setups, so comparing them directly isn't really possible. This is where it gets genuinely hard to call. Qwen's raw throughput looks fast on paper, but that 11.5 second TTFT is a real problem for interactive use, and Claude's tunable effort setting is a real advantage since you can dial down reasoning depth for simple tasks. Qwen's always-on chain of thought means you pay the latency cost every single time. No toggle, this one's a tie. And I want to be straight about why. I was expecting to hand Qwen the win on raw speed, but the data isn't comparable and there's no apples-to-apples throughput test between these two. So we can't award a winner honestly, and that leaves the score at 2 for Claude Opus 5. 1 for Qwen 3.6 Plus with 1 tied test on the board. So here's where Qwen 3.6 Plus actually wins. At $0.325 per million input tokens versus $5, that's a 15 times cost difference. And for high volume agentic pipelines, that's a huge deal. It also scores 61.6% on terminal bench against older Claude versions, and its native 1 million token context is trained end-to-end, not a sliding window workaround. And here's where Claude Opus 5 is genuinely in a different league. Arc AGI 3 at 30.2% is reportedly 3 times the next best model. OS World 2.0 computer use at 70.6%, Browse Comp Agentic Search at 90.8%, max output at 128,000 tokens, which is double Qwen's cap, and a tunable effort setting that lets you control the cost latency trade-off in a way Qwen just doesn't allow. Honestly, I went in thinking the price gap would be the whole story, but Claude Opus 5's reasoning scores are genuinely hard to argue with. So here's the decision rule. If you need high volume pipelines, cost-sensitive coding workflows, or long document retrieval on a budget, go Qwen 3.6 Plus, and if you need frontier reasoning, autonomous computer use, or long-form generation in a single call, Claude Opus 5 is worth the premium.